Yeah, Coach. Did Desmond do enough to be designated as the quarterback of the future for the Atlanta Falcons?
Well, D-Lad, we're still early in the offseason, but we were certainly encouraged by the progress he made. But there's a lot of work ahead of us before we're ready to declare anything like that right now.
And for you, Terry, could you walk us through some of the processes of, as we're into the offseason now, what's next? Scout meetings start, free agency evaluations, bowl games, and you all coaching in one now, I guess, too.
Yeah, we're right in the heart of everything, and the scouting department does a really good job. We've already had some college meetings in December. The pro staff has been in pro meetings for the last couple weeks, and so we're right in the heart of that. Now, as we wrap up the season, the first thing we do is we look in the mirror, and we're going to look at every aspect of the program and assess every detail, take a deep dive, and look at the things that went well, the things we want to continue to build on, and where are the areas that we need to improve. So we'll take our time and we'll first self-scout and self-assess, and then we'll move forward.
And just a follow-up for Coach and your defensive coordinator search, could you describe how you want to approach that? And
yeah, obviously, we'll miss Dean, and I'm glad he got to talk to everybody on Monday. That was important. And so we've cast a really wide net, D-Led, and we're going to take our time, which I think is important. Certainly there's things that, familiarity with certain schemes that you want to talk to, but we're not going to be closed-minded about anything. So I think it's important. I like the setup now they have I think it helps where you don't feel rushed. I think in years past, if you're in this situation, you may feel a little rushed. I think things have seemed to slow down. So we'll be very mindful of that. I want to talk to a lot of people. I already have talked to a few so far, but we'll take our time.
You said that you've been encouraged, but way too early in the process. How much of the process in deciding whether or not Desmond's your guy going forward is what maybe you do in review versus outside factors, whether it's a quarterback you guys fall in love with in the draft versus somebody who's maybe available in free agency or not? Terry, either one of you guys.
Right, Mike. I think he kind of just answered it. There's a lot of things, and Terry just described, with the offseason, where you are, a couple days when the season just ended. And like I said, we were, very encouraged, but there's a lot of things that could change. There's things it's healthy to take a step back. Like not even just a couple days after, Mike, as we, a couple weeks as you go back and you go through your cut-ups and you watch the games again, you watch the throws and conversations that Terry and I will have, and, it's just doesn't make a lot of sense right now, 2 days removed from the season, to make any declaration about the roster or this guy's future. We'll take our time. We obviously have had conversations, but there's a lot of work to be done until then.
In terms of when you brought Dean in 2 years
right.
ago, 70 at the time, 71, I can't imagine it was he's going to be your decade solution. Like what was
Charlie Munger still going pretty good, right?
But,
and he's pretty, he's a lot younger than Charlie, but.
I guess my point, my question is, when you brought him in, like, what was the thought process just to have him or help him have established a culture, and then you'd figure it out from there? And
well, he was on I think he told you that. He was on a 3-year deal. Obviously with Dean, with working with Tennessee, and the joke about nobody ever really retires, but that was a big deal. We talked out and getting here, and so. Again, circumstances change. You're talking about right now, you're trying to ask questions when who knows what the future holds. But clearly, the incident in New Orleans certainly changed your perspective, among other things. And so you always have contingency plans and know there's a possibility. But Dean gave us everything he had. And, he signed a 3-year deal. And so initially, that was the plan. But knowing that it could change. And then something unforeseen happened and perspective changes. And I'm happy for Dean and always grateful for what he did, especially when you're coming in as a first-time head coach, and the wisdom and, the job. He knew it was going to be much different than any other job he's taken in the NFL. And, gosh, the way, he cares about our players, and everybody works hard in his profession, but the way he cares is different.
I guess with that, when it comes to the scheme, and maybe this is a better question, maybe for you, Terry, I don't know. You guys figure out who you think can answer it best. With the way you guys have built this over the last 2 years, do
right.
you feel like what you built can fit either a 4-3 or 3-4 front, or did you kind of have to look at it and say the preference is
Well, no,
X?
Mike, I think what you're looking at it, you could say you're 3-4, but you got to think of how many different front variations there are. And, you know, a lot of the game when you're playing spread out and an 11, whether you're a true 4-3 or 3-4, you're in a lot of 4-down fronts. So whether you have the hybrid guys that we do, our outside linebackers that are essentially defensive ends on 4-down fronts, you know, that kind of, I think, gets overstated sometimes. You know, structurally, it's really about being flexible. And there's a lot of guys and there's a lot of great schemes in this league, but and this will, you know, Terry can certainly share his opinion on it, but when you are building the kind of hybrid model, like you're not looking for an overhaul. We've been building something here, and you look at something like Baltimore's a great example. They've had a lot of success with that scheme. Everybody's had their own, clearly, you know, they've had a lot of different defense coordinators, a lot of success, and they've tweaked different things of it and made it their own, but the way they've drafted and they built it, that vision to be able to play multiple and to have guys that are really versatile, that won't change regardless of who the play caller is. So that foundation has been built. Now, it'll be refreshing to go in there, and as we get to more formal interviews and hear other people's perspectives and learn a lot about people, and we'll hire the best candidate. But the way we built, that won't change, Mike. And then Terry can certainly.
We've had a lot of conversations, even while Dean was here. Arthur knows what he wants on defense. Arthur doesn't, as a head coach, as a play caller, he doesn't just stay on one side of the building and just focus on the offense. He's involved in every phase. Special teams, defense, offense. So he's involved in every area, and so he knows which he's always known as what structure he wants, what types. He knows what affects him as a play caller, and what you struggle with. So he knows what he wants it to look like. And him and Dean obviously conversated a lot, and him and the defensive coaches. So it's not like now we're bringing in a new visionary of the defense and he's going to have a whole different, you know, Arthur really knows what he's looking for, and he'll be strategic in that. When we draft players, we weren't prisoners of the moment, and they're not going to fit. We're drafting players that can be multiple and can fit what we're looking for.
And that's why I brought up Baltimore, because that's the most relatable example of a place that's had sustained success with a lot of different play callers and the way they've drafted and built that. And that's probably the most relatable I can give you to kind of paint that picture.
How about that? Dean, you know, you even said it last week, like he has so much experience.
Sure. Was
part of that. Do you want someone who has maybe that experience either as a head coach or has been around for so long, that because you, Dave, Marquise are all kind of in that same age?
You're big on age discrimination.
Well, I know, I'm saying more
not to put you on the spot,
but I'm just saying more from an experience standpoint. Is that something that you value?
We're not going to, you know, we're in a different spot. I mean, obviously, I was thankful, you know, with Dean and the experience, but we're not going to limit that, whether somebody's in their 20s, you know, 70s, 80s, 90s, 60s, I mean, whatever, Mike. But we'll hire the best guy. But we're in a different frame of mind than where we were with the program coming in year one.
Terry, I want to ask a couple questions about the cap. When you look at it from 10,000-foot view of the last 2 years and where you guys are this offseason, when you look at the last 2 years, the moves that y'all made, does it really feel like those moves have gotten y'all to this point in being able to have the money that you do have to spend this offseason?
Yeah, appreciate the question, and it's we're in the next phase of the plan. So we had a plan from the very beginning, and now we're in the next phase of that. And this is going to be a different offseason than we had the previous years. And yet we're still going to be smart, and we're still going to handle things the right way. We're still going to set parameters and have discipline in everything we do. And yet it's going to be a different offseason than it was. And yes, decisions we made before, we knew exactly what we're stepping into. We knew what the challenge was, and we knew, okay, early on in year one, we're going to have a lot of young players, but we have to sign some veterans because we want to establish the culture, and we want to establish our identity, and we want to make sure we're setting a foundation the right way. So we had some veterans on one-year deals, kind of much like Dean. Dean was here 2 years, and yet Dean laid a foundation that's going to continue to pay dividends moving forward. And when this team is getting to where it needs to be, Dean was a part of that. We have some players that were here just 1 year that are a part of setting that foundation. So we had a plan in year one. We come into year 2, a much different team, a much younger team, a different core on this team, and yet, and that's the tough part about it. When you sit, on Monday after the season, once the season ends, it's going to be a different team, and that's the nature of the business. There are going to be a lot of different players, and yet those players that were here, they're a part of setting that foundation. So yes, we made decisions. We always want to be as competitive as possible. This year, we want to be as competitive as possible, and yet we wanted to make sure we're making the right decisions. And now the phase that we're in, it's going to be a different offseason.
To that end of foundation and having foundational pieces, how do you weigh when you're looking at these next few months and getting closer and closer to the start of the league year? How much do you weigh kind of re-signing guys like Chris Lindstrom and going out and finding other guys to fill in? I mean, how are you weighing that in terms of the money that you do have available?
Yes, I think what's really important, one thing that we have here is we have a very strong culture. And that's and you guys know because you see practice, you're around the building, you see the players, so you know the culture we have here. And on Sundays, you look at the way every game, the way the guys fought and competed for the entire game, but it's the same thing, and it's a credit to coach and the staff and the players and the leadership that we have a really strong culture and a strong foundation here, the way they attack everything, the meetings, the practices, the weight room, everything. And so we have to make sure we always prioritize that, and that's critical, whether we're looking at players, because we're going to go through an assessment of every player on the roster, whether they're under contract or not under contract, and it's going to always start with the makeup. It's going to start with the character, personal character, football character, what's their fit, what's our trust level of them in the building, outside the building. It's going to always start with the culture. It's going to start with their character, and that's the same outside the building. And we have to be smart about that. We can't bring players in that are going to take away from that. We have to always make sure that we're prioritizing that. So when you talk about a guy like Chris, and obviously we're not going to talk about contracts in here, we're not going to negotiate in the media, but man, Chris, you talk about winning championships on and off the field, and obviously he was the Walter Payton Man of the Year for us, and got to see his family and spend some time with them at that event. And it's really cool when you look at a guy that the person that he is outside the building, the person he is in the building, what this offensive line did, he was a big part of that. And you look at our team captains, him and Chris and Jake and Grady and AJ, those are all guys, they're the same. They win championships on and off the field. So that culture piece is important. So we do have to handle that the right way, and we can't bring players in that don't fit that.
Just to kind of follow up on that topic is that y'all signed a bunch of guys on those 1 year kind of prove it deals, and some of those guys went out there and proved it. And there's been, y'all have talked about wanting to take care of your own, even though those guys have only been there for 1 year. Do they fall under that umbrella? Yeah,
there's absolutely. We're gonna go through that process, and the tough thing, Scott, sometimes is. We do have, just because we have more resources this offseason, we still have to have discipline. We still have to set parameters. We're trying to put together a puzzle, and so it's not sometimes what's best for an individual player isn't what's best for the team. So in some of those cases, sometimes players won't end up back here. It kind of depends on what the market dictates. We have to make sure we're looking at the total picture. But there were a lot of guys that came here and did some really good things. And yes, you always want to. We always start here. We start with our team, and you really want to bring back as many guys as you can if it works out, because they're guys in our building. Because it is hard when guys are outside the building. You want to lean on overlaps and if you have connections some type of way, because it's more risky in free agency when we're bringing players from outside the building when you have a strong culture like we have. So we want to make sure we really look hard at our players.
Do you feel like your young foundation has gotten bigger over the course of the year, and do you feel like your shopping list maybe has gotten smaller because of some of the players who have emerged over the course of the year?
Well, I feel like, honestly, there's not a position in every phase at every position we want to add, whether we're adding top 10 talent, whether we're adding depth. We want to add, because that's the culture we build. It's about development and competition. And so we know we need to add competition in every area. And even the players on this roster, whether it's a young player, because we have one of the younger teams in the NFL, not just first or second year players, but players that are on their first contract, just coming off their first contract. We do have a young core, but they have to take another step this offseason, because we are going to continue to work hard to build this program. So So everyone has to look at this offseason and take on that challenge, which I know they will because we have the right mindset in the building. But we do want to continue to grow in every area, and every player has to look at it like that because we do. There's not a position that you can look at on the roster that you say, okay, we're all set, we don't need to add there. We need to add to every position.
Arthur, what's Marcus Mariota's status with the team?
Well, you know, he was here Monday like all our players, his exit physical, and so we'll assess the, you know, obviously we have up until the league year, and there'll be conversations, and so there's nothing to update now. It's like with a lot of our guys that are under contract, decisions have to be made, but nothing's been made right now.
You talked about coming into the season about there were a few positions that were kind of up for grabs, or there were positions that can be competed for on the offensive line. Coming toward the end of the season, do you feel like that number has dwindled as far as positions being up for grabs?
I've been waiting all year for you to come back. I guess you waited till the end of the year. They must have been playing different. I haven't seen it. You doing all right? You all right? Hey, you look good. You doing all right though? No, I thought those guys played well, but to Terry's point, you know, nothing ever, you know, stays the same whether you want it to or not. But I think there was a lot of strides made in that room, which was what I was talking about during camp. And so, you know, it's one thing to say it, but there's one thing, you know, the results hopefully prove that. You know, with certainly Drew at the center spot. You know, we did a lot of different left guards, and they all contributed between Elijah and Colby and Henny and Chuma. You know, Chuma played a game there. So, and that's a credit, too, to the stability of that room and Jake and Drew. You're mixing and matching. So, you know, who knows what the future holds. I thought certainly guys improved a lot. I think there's a huge, you know, every year in the NFL, but you talk about year 1 to year 2 jump to year 3, and then you certainly saw it with Chris in year 4 and Caleb. So pleased, you know, there's some decisions you still got to make, but the progress there was real, and you saw it week in and week out.
Terry, I wanted to ask about you. You talked about moving into the next phase. You always talked about how best player available has always been your kind of draft strategy. Do you feel like that maybe changed some? Because just from a mindset standpoint, when it comes to evaluating talent, being that you are moving into another phase, is there flexibility there?
Well, no, it really doesn't change, and I understand what you're asking. If you have this specific, you feel like you really need something here, where I think sometimes where that gets, if you look at the draft and you look at free agency, they're kind of similar in ways, right? So you have every position, and some positions are stronger and some positions are thinner. Some positions are top-heavy and don't have depth. So in the draft, when we talk about best player available, that doesn't mean if we really need a position and we see a guy, that doesn't mean we're going to go up and get him just like we did. We traded up and got AK in the second round because we saw him there. Now, where we wouldn't have gotten in trouble if we wait and then we're just going to take the best pass rusher as opposed to that's where we don't want to reach. It's the same in free agency. If you look at free agency, there's some really strong positions and there's going to be some thin positions. So what we can't do in free agency is feel like, oh, we have to have this particular position and then we're going to go and overpay a player at a thin position. We need to improve the total roster. And so that's why when we talk about best player available and taking the best players, it's the same thing in free agency. We need to bring in good football players that fit the characteristics that we're looking for, fit the makeup we're looking for, and it's a complementary game. So if we improve the team, then we're going to be better overall. So we don't want to reach in the draft much like we don't want to reach in free agency.
Do you feel like that with, just for example, Caleb and Gary, you know, going into free agency, and do you feel like you have to use that same mindset even though you want to take care of your own, so to speak?
Well, look, we talk about, and again, we're not going to negotiate in the media, like we said, but Caleb did some really good things this year, and he was a part of setting that foundation. We talk about the offensive line, and you can go put on any game and the way they established the line of scrimmage, the way we ran the football, that tough mindset. Caleb was a part of that, you know, and yet we want to make sure that, hey, it'd be great if you can always have the same players and keep a cohesive unit together, but that's just that's not how it works sometimes. Sometimes there are different parts, but we want to continue to have that identity on our offensive line and have that tough mindset. So Caleb did some really good things, but that's the business part of it that we're not going to – that those will be direct conversations with him and his representation. We're not going to do that here.
Arthur,
you don't necessarily know what's going to happen defensively with the defensive staff. Do you anticipate, or have you made any other staff changes?
Nothing to announce right now, Mike. There will be a natural evolution that happens even with the coaching staff, and certainly as we get through interviewing defensive coordinators, and there'll be guys that are some already that will have slips turned in, I'm sure, and if there's opportunities. So, like I said, I think in years past, and I think the league's done a good job of slowing things down. Even the way you go about the interview process with the coordinators, I think is good for everybody. So it's hard on Wednesday. I think certainly, and it's good to have people want guys off your staff too. So there could be, hopefully it's a good reason if we can't provide that promotion for somebody, if they get an opportunity somewhere else, a good thing. But there will naturally be changes defensively, and a big part of that is the coordinator.
And in terms of edge rushers this year, that was an area where you guys overhauled in the offseason, and then production, at least sack-wise, was still not probably where you guys like it. What do you need to do to filter that? And I realize defensive coordinator could change all of that.
Well, some of it's not just edge, Mike. I mean, again, it's like when I hear the best player available, there's always taken with a grain of salt. Like, you're not, if you already have like two really good left tackles, nobody's drafting a third left tackle because they're the best player available. So the same, when you look at things like that, sometimes you look at, just because guys are young. You see guys in this league that are taken, and Tampa with Tryon, what he looked like a year ago to what he looked like in this year, that's what you're talking about development. Just because something happened year one, like Richie Grant, and then Richie year two. So there's a lot of that it was a lot younger group on the outside. But the sack number sometimes is not just edge. There's guys inside that can affect it. There's certain linebackers and certain third down schemes that may be really good rushers that's another accountable. So there's a lot of ways. Clearly we want more, and we know that's an area of improvement. It's not just because we took two young edge guys that it was magically you had Lawrence Taylor year one. So there's a lot of things as we build and strategically, and then other pieces that you add along with it, and the development of these young guys. That's how, to me, we need to take another step. But there's a lot of moving parts to it.
Yeah, I was about to say, you look at some early season, we had some critical sacks that ended games, and it was a player sitting on a route and the quarterback had to hold the ball a tick long, and then it gave him a little more time to get there. Like Coach is saying, we need to improve the total team. Yes, edge rushers, it's always a premium position. We have some players that we're excited about that need to take the next step, and we believe they will. But we're always going to prioritize that position, and yet when you improve, if you have a stout defensive tackle that stops the run on first and second down, then you get more pass rush opportunities. When you have the secondary, the tight coverage, you're forcing the quarterback to hold the ball longer. When you're playing with leads, and so offensively you're playing with leads, then you get more – the guys can pin their ears back. So it's a complementary game. So you're not just going to add one player at a certain position and then all of a sudden the sack numbers go up. It's about improving the total team.
We haven't talked with you really since the start of the season.
Right.
How do you feel like this year went?
Yeah, it's look. We sit here and we're 7-10. Every time we lose a game, we hate losing. We're all competitors and we hate losing. But what we appreciate is the resilience of this team and the way they fought and competed every single game, and the way they competed in practice and the way they continue. We have a really resilient team. It hurts whenever you lose. You hate it for the staff. You hate it for the players. You hate it for the fans. We have a really passionate fan base. We appreciate them all the way down to the last game against Tampa, the energy in the building, all those things. And so you hate losing any games. We're competitors. But what we really believe in, we believe in the direction of this program. And we're very excited about the culture that we've instilled on competitiveness and development. We're very excited about the identity of this team. And so we really believe that we're moving in the right direction, and we're excited about going into this offseason and getting better.
Arthur, if I could follow up on what you said about taking your time on the defensive coordinator situation, is that, I don't know if you can talk about East-West game, if that's been officially announced, but how does that
Officially announced? Just the rumor mill.
if you were to have a staff in a
So hypothetically?
Hypothetically, how would you approach that?
So what the league's done a good job of, if you are one of those staffs that coaches in there, they want it to be about development. So, it's a lot of the younger guys getting opportunities and bigger roles is kind of the format that that whatever teams are going down there to coach it, that's kind of the model, which I think is good. There are very few opportunities to get real experience in terms of development. We try. There's a lot of things, and we'll continue to work on behind the scenes here with our program. But it could be a unique opportunity if we were one of those teams to be chosen. I mean, we have to do it, allegedly.
Terry, allegedly, how does that affect your Senior Bowl schedule? Do you still plan to be in Mobile?
So we'll find the right balance, because obviously there's going to be good players at every game. So we want to make sure. What we usually do is you'll have a group of scouts that go to the East-West and then go to the Senior Bowl afterwards, and you'll balance it out. But we'll make sure we have both covered.
You mentioned culture a lot today. What is Atlanta Falcons culture? How would you define it?
Yeah, it's every day. You're competing and doing the very best you can in whatever you're doing. How you do anything is how you do everything. That's the approach. And I think it's the way our group, the way we handle adversity. Again, the heart of it is our head coach and our coaching staff and our players and the leadership in the locker room that we talked about. But it starts with them, and regardless of what happens in the game, we have a tough loss, they're ready to roll on Monday. And whether it's on the practice field, in the weight room, in the meeting rooms, everything they're doing, they're ready to go. And the enthusiasm, if you go out to the field and you see the way the guys fly around at practice all the way to the end of the last game of the season, man, the enthusiasm that they're playing with, the way they're competing, it's the positivity, the optimism, and the way the guys compete and work hard. That's what the culture is. It really is. It's about getting better. And it doesn't matter, sometimes we talk about draft picks and free agents. It doesn't matter how you got here. It doesn't matter. Like, when the guys are in the building, the best guys on a weekly basis, the best guys are going to play. And we're going to find the best players to put on the field. So I would say the culture is it's about continued development, continued competition, and it's just a real positive group that they all know we're setting the right foundation, and they know the direction we're moving in.
For Coach Smith, what's been the biggest leap in terms of growth that you feel like you've made from year 1 to year 2 as a head coach?
Well, it's really your mindset every day. You're never going to have all the answers. You're going to make some mistakes, and if you're humble enough to realize that and to lean on others, it's a continual growth, and that's what we believe in here. It's really a big part of our core is that having that mindset. And so inevitably what happens anytime you take a job, new responsibility, there's a lot of unknown. You prepare everything out, and then things come up that test you. And so I think there's a daily growth with a job. It helps when you're in a place like Atlanta, and the way our building's structured and the relationship with Terry. I've said this many times. I mean, it's hard enough to win this league. It's really hard when you're dealing with the day-to-day drama that belongs on a Bravo TV show, Bravo TV. So we don't have that here, and I'm thankful for that every day. But it's continuing to learn as you get into year 2, even the little stuff this time of year with the staffing, all the stuff that, hey, what can we do better? How can I improve the calendar? How can I tweak this? Let's look at what we were doing practice-wise. So I'm just thankful every day, you get to do this job, but there's a constant self-evaluation and growth. Certainly you're more comfortable. It doesn't make the job any easier, but there's a lot of unknowns that you've been through now twice that you try to prepare for and improve.
This question for both of you. What do you think are some of the benefits of being down in those bowl games, to having all the players in one space like that?
Yeah, I think every exposure is important. Right, every exposure that every time you get to deal with a player, just for example, you talk about a guy like Desmond, right? And what we really appreciate about Desmond is the way he handles himself, right? The way he handled himself in the building when he got here, the way he handled the approach throughout the week, the way he handled himself as a backup, and in the games, the way he handled himself. His poise, his confidence, but the type of teammate he was, everything. So from the very beginning with Desmond, from reading all his reports, talk about the toughness and the mental toughness, all those areas. Spend time with him at the Senior Bowl. You see him at the Senior Bowl, you see the same thing. We see him at the Combine. It's the same thing. When we sat down with him at the Pro Day, and you see the same thing. So every exposure to these players are important, and our scouting department does a good job getting exposed to the players, but sometimes our coaches don't get to spend as much time. So then if you can spend more time with the players and be around them even more, as opposed to just the meetings, getting to see them in the dining hall, in the meeting rooms, and then the exposure our coaches get, also our staff gets more exposure if they're coaches in those games. So that's critical. And again, our staff does a really good job, but every exposure is important. And like I bring up Desmond to say that there was a consistency throughout every time we were in touch with him. So getting to see these other players even more, we'll take advantage of that.
It could be very valuable to you, not only in the short term but the long term. I mean, my only other experience was in 2014. I was on a staff that coached the Senior Bowl, and not necessarily guys that you take that you coach, or maybe it's these guys that are going around the other teams and they're going to come back up. Maybe they're college free agents that may come back to the practice squad, and you at least have some exposure to them. Players that are staple players that you may compete against once or twice a year, and you at least have some knowledge of them and what they're made of and fit. They may come back through free agency. So all the exposures Terry's talking about, it's not even for the short term.
Yep.
A lot of times for the long term. And I think the more you get to know these players that are coming through every year, the better off you are.
You mentioned, it's kind of developmental with the coaching staff situation there. When you were there in 2014, was that developmental for you? Because when you were
because it was. So Mike, Malarkey, that wasn't. I think it naturally happened. Now it's way more. Use the corporate buzzword intentional, and it's good thing. But the way they have it structured, but it's kind of it used to be kind of an unwritten. If you were on a big staff with some veterans, they should let the younger guys do it. And Mike let me do that week, and some tight ends like Nick Boyle was a guy he got to coach that's been around the league a long time, and got good exposure that way for sure.
Arthur, you talked about being judicious in terms of big free agent dollars. Now that you're hypothetically in the position to give out big free agent dollars, how do you get comfortable with a person in that scenario in what's a short time frame?
I mean that's a credit to our whole football staff, Josh. When at some point, we're not going to limit somebody. To Terry's point, you'd like to have as much information as possible, relationships. But when you make those decisions, I mean, there's a process we go through, and a lot of it is about relationships. And again, everybody's going to put their best foot forward if you're getting ready to hand out a contract. We're well aware of that. But there's a lot of things you lean into, their habits day to day to make the best decisions, like who this person is. It's not just because of the one meeting or a 15-minute, speed dating. Like, oh wow, this is where we're going. But there's a lot of things too that you can look on, lean on. Trust our whole football staff, the scouting, any relationships, the background. A lot of things go into that decision.
And Arthur kind of said it, Josh, when you talk about this game, right? Getting to be involved in the East-West game or the Senior Bowl or getting to be around these players, it's not – or all the information that our college scouts gather on all these players and they start writing a book on those players, it's not just about the specific draft. So you spend all this time on all these players, and then you gather information, and then you draft the players that you draft and sign the players that you sign. It's not just about that. It's not. We want to be involved in all these exposures because it could be 4 years down the road. It could be later on in the process. Even if you're not able to draft the player, we still have been writing a book on the player. And then look, a lot of things move around. Players move around. Coaches move around. We're always gathering intel as much as we can on players. So just you're not going to just focus on just a little bit of time you got to spend with them. These players have had careers, and again, we have a really good scouting staff that have tracked it, and we're going to always lean on any exposures that we had.
You guys talk about that with like when you're watching film throughout the season. Like, do you guys actually take notes and say, oh, when it comes time for X, this might be an avenue you want to go down? Like, are those conversations that happen between the two of you?
We have a lot of conversations all day, every day.
Yes, obviously. But I was just wondering whether that's something that you make mental notes of, or maybe Terry, you do when you're, from your perspective.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's the good thing about, we talk about that, about not just our relationship, but the relationships throughout the building, whether we're talking about Kyle Smith and Dave Ragone or Marquise, we have a lot of really good, close relationships, and we're constantly talking, whether it's a text message, it's a call. Again, I always get these, but I got a text from Kyle like 3 weeks ago at like 11:45 at night, and he's watching tape on our team against someone else, and there's a player that he kind of likes in the game, and he's texting me about it. So those conversations naturally go on because of the relationships throughout the building.
Terry and Coach, how do you all square when guys get to the market? Sometimes it's, like Foye just didn't have the money, or Devondre Campbell just didn't have the money, or, sometimes guys, they, didn't do so good and didn't, and they make it to the market. How do you find the guys that are, you feel like can fit and play, and guys that, may not have played that well earlier in their career?
You're asking when we're talking about our players and how do we?
I'm talking about free agents specifically. From how do you, there are going to be guys that are on the open market because the team couldn't pay for them, and there are going to be guys that are on the open market because the team didn't want them.
Yeah, it's all risk assessment because and it's a risky business because you're right. If there's a reason they're letting that player out the building. And it could just be just that, hey, financially, they might not be able to afford them. They might not be a specific fit. There could be an injury thing. There could be a character thing. So it's all risk assessment, and that's the onus is on us to make sure we know exactly what it's risk assessment, and we can really go through, hey, why is this player available, and is this player going to be the right fit? So that's on us. And look, I believe we've done a good job. Even in the last couple of years, we've been able to bring in some free agents that are good football players, and we have to do the same thing. But you have to look at all those factors.
Terry, with this past year's draft class, obviously the goal going into a draft is you want to draft players that are going to make an impact and are going to start. But by season's end, you guys had 3 on offense, 3 on defense that were making high impact plays and in the lineup. Did you see that happening maybe as early as minicamp when these guys were in the facility?
I think what we love about this draft class and the previous one is we keep kind of going back to that, the character, the mindset, the mentality, and the way the guys approach and the way they compete. And so, even early on, if a player's not playing as much on defense, we talk about a guy like Troy or a guy like D'Angelo, you go watch any game and he's run down on kickoff, knocking the hell out of people because he's just a tough, physical, competitive player. And so because we're not – coach is going to play the best players, and we're not going to play players just because they're young, talented. The best players are going to get jerseys. But what you love about this class is even when they're not, their number hadn't gotten called on offense or defense, they're doing everything else that they need to do to get on the field. Even when you look at Drake, like the play I get most excited about in this last game is him digging out, blocking in the run game, and the physicality he plays with. And so I think the mindset of the class, we saw that early on, just the way the guys work and the way they compete, and that's why we brought him in. But I think that's the part that you saw early on. It's about development, and so some players develop at different rates, and so some guys might not play as much early on. But what we saw in this draft class and that what we love is the mindset.
Following up on that, and this may be kind of too big, but how do you find that? Some people can be really good in interviews and not necessarily be that way in real life. So when you go about asking these guys and talking to them and watching their film, what pinpoints you to be able to say, yeah, this is the mindset that we want?
Yeah, and it all ties in because when we're assessing a player's football character, and if, again, our scouts do a really good job of they're in the schools and they're gathering all the information. And if they get a lot of good information from the staffs there, but then they go out to the practice field and they see the guys lazy on the practice field, well, this doesn't tie together. It's not like our scouts they're not just reporting information that they gather. They're looking at all the pieces of it. And so at this point, they've been in the schools. They've been around, like early on, they saw the players when they were freshmen. And so they've been in those buildings. And so they're getting information from everyone in the school. They're seeing them at practice. Then we get the information. And again, we hit all those exposures, and there's a lot of exposures to those players. So it's everything matters. Everything really matters. And I think we have a group that does a really good job. And then as the coaches get involved, our coaches are heavily involved in the process as well, and we gather as much information as we can, and everything matters.
Terry, to follow that, do you feel like the information is more back to where it was 2019 levels because of the last couple of years with scouts not being able to maybe be as around, I guess would be the best. Have you noticed that?
Talking about with the COVID restrictions?
Yeah, with COVID. Like, have you noticed like there's maybe a better level of information now when you're starting to look at this year's draft versus maybe the last couple of years for you guys?
Well, it was different. It was definitely different. There was unique times because not only were they limited the scouting staffs, but then we were limited as well with what we could really do. And even little things like, virtual meetings are great, right? We all do virtual meetings and all that. But think about it, even with this, where we are right now, where we were when we couldn't have these, this is different than when we were sitting in our offices or our rooms individually and with cameras and Led was having trouble with it. He couldn't even ask the question because he's having trouble with the connection. So it is the personal interactions that's important. Even you think about draft meetings or scouts, those little side conversations, and when you're grabbing a coffee or all that stuff is important. Or when you break the meeting and you can go and sit in somebody's office and do something, those things are really important. So I think the entire process was affected. Everyone was affected by it, but it did change the process. Yes.
I was wondering whether you feel like it's back to normal or
yes.
Closer to what you.
I do. Yep.
Two-part question, if I can get both of you to respond. Going back to Georgia's win, if you look at Stetson Bennett, when you turn on the tape, what do you see out of that kid, and does he have a future in the NFL?
Yeah, that's not something. Did D-Led tell you to ask that question? Is that how? Look, Georgia. Obviously, man, that program 2 in a row. Not only Stetson, but they have a lot of good football players. I mean, you just look at the class that they put out last year, and they got a lot of good football players. Kirby's doing a hell of a job there, and that's kind of Georgia too. I have kids that are in grade school, so I go to the high school games and stuff, and I'm kind of around it. It's unbelievable in this area, all the talent that you have, even park ball. Going and watching my son's 11 and going and watching the little football. Those little 10 and 11-year-olds in this area shouldn't be doing the stuff that they're doing. The plays they're making, like, that's not real. He was at some training facility last night. My wife's texting me, and it's crazy what these kids are doing, pulling sleds and the stuff. So it's this area is there's a lot of really good football here, man. So it's fun to watch. Happy for those guys, but we're not ready to get into evaluations right now.
You want me to go on record that? As you can tell, with Terry's point and D-Led and the underworld of youth football that he recruits at Gwinnett County. I mean, there is a lot of talent in the state, and it's well known. It's impressive, all across the state. The youth sports here, the coaching, that does have an effect. I mean, we actually have a lot of guys on our roster that are from this area, and that's not by accident. It's because of the talent level and watching around this area, and I have for years. And Georgia, where they're rolling, the thing that's impressive to me, it's funny what human psychology does once they got over that hump, right? For years they couldn't do this, that, but they kept chipping away, and that's a credit to Kirby and the perseverance he has and the not listening to all the delusional emotion out there. And they had their process, and once they got over that hump, it's been pretty damn impressive as they built that thing over time. And they're rolling clearly better than anybody right now. And so that is fun to watch, from program building, just being here now, living in this state. I've got a niece that's a sophomore there, so partial to Georgia, not just to appease the fans or your Twitter fans, D-Led. So in terms of Stetson, to Terry's point, we're not there on our draft evaluation, but gotta give him a lot of credit on a lot of games, and the state and the people that are fans of Georgia should be really proud of what they've done.
Terry, if I can follow up and ask a similar question, but not about a specific player. Just in your career, how has the way you guys evaluate quarterbacks changed? If we look at this draft class, maybe the top quarterback may be 6 feet tall, and there's others that are not what may have been considered prototypical a decade ago. How differently do you look at your evaluations of what you need at that position?
Yeah, well, it's all a part of the process, right? Looking at you're trying to there's a certain percentage of these players that are going to not make it and a certain percentage that are going to make it, so you're trying to get your hit rate up. And so the way you do that is you look at history, and you look at, okay, what is prototype, and this is the prototype size. And sometimes it's not just about, when you talk about prototype size, it's not just about height, weight, but you look at, there are some players that can be shorter, but their hand size, they have really big hands, or there's just different factors at every position. It's not just as easy as looking at a player's height, weight, speed. You look at all the little details. So it's important to look at those measurables, but then it always comes down to, okay, the traits and what's the specific. Okay, this is a quarterback. Okay, where's his accuracy? Where's his decision making? Or if it's a receiver, can he get open and catch the football? Sometimes it's that simple. And we look at the measurables. We look at the makeup. It's all a part of the total picture. Just like at that quarterback position, we're never going to say we're only going to take prototype players, and we're never going to say, it's all about the players that fit the characteristics that you're looking for. They have the traits that you're looking for, and we're not going to limit ourselves and say we're only going to take players that are above this certain standard.
How is Kyle Pitts doing in his rehab, and do you anticipate him being back by offseason program or camp? Is there a timetable for that?
There's no official timetable. I mean, like a lot of our guys that didn't finish the season healthy, they have different rehab schedules, but very optimistic on all of them. But there's no set timetable right now. But good to see Kyle the other day at the game. Saw TQ the other day. Saw Big Duke Huntley in there.
Duke was around, yeah.
Yeah, so all those guys, they'll be on different timetables. But
Duke's on a scooter.
Yeah, we're optimistic. But your point, too, sometimes people get enamored with the wrong things and how it correlates from college football to pros. Even in free agency, you talk about vision, D-led. That's a big part of it, too. The guy may not be successful somewhere. The scheme may have changed, this and that. You may have liked him coming out. Hey, let's try it here. May try a different role. We may use him different. Some of them we've had a lot of success with. Other ones we've taken a flyer and it didn't work. But sometimes it's worth doing that, and you're trying to take in. Same thing when you're looking at players. Everybody's going to get enamored. I mean, I'm already pained, and I feel for some of these guys coming out now that the ridiculousness of the hot takes of the height, weight, whatever. But a lot of it, too, some things that correlate and don't. Sometimes you guys go to a program, what they're asked to do. It's not their fault that they see nothing but free access and they catch 120 balls. But you'd hope to be able to see them try to beat man coverage. I don't care how fast they are, how tall they are. Same thing with the quarterback. The pocket in the National Football League is completely different than college. Translates, some guys are Hall of Fame players. Some guys are All-American Heisman winners. It doesn't translate from other, maybe different circumstances, programs, scheme. But it's not apples to apples. It's the only comparison we have is the next step. But there's so many things and so many factors that go into it that you've got to make sure you've got the right vision, you've got the right football staff, and when you make those decisions, you got to plan for those players.
And I was more like guys in recent years, like Shaquille Barrett bounces around and turns into All-Pro. Charles Harris bounces and then does a big year in Detroit last year. I'm just trying to see if that's I don't know, that's kind of hard to hit on those, but that's kind of y'all's challenge.
Well, sometimes guys improve too, D-Led. By the time you get them, I mean, they've learned from some of their mistakes. And maybe the schemes changed, or maybe they had some things off the field that they had no incentive to change. When you get cut 3 times and you say, "This is my last shot," and I'll be there on time, and I've grown up. Well, they had incentive to do it. Again, circumstance, confidence, those years of trying to improve. We talk about growth. When you're asking me about that, it pays off. So. Yeah, they didn't work out with the first 2 teams. It doesn't mean that they were, this coach, didn't use them right, or this player was ahead of them for whatever reason. Because whatever. Sometimes it just takes guys a couple of years, anyways, and circumstances change, whatnot. So there's a lot of factors into it. To answer your question that way.
Coach, speaking of development, not to lessen any performance from other rookies. But how do you guys feel about Argiers? How excited are you guys about his performance lately?
Tyler, very. I mean, I think what you want to see is guys playing their best football at the end of the year. I mean, that's, I've said this, a few times already, but that's very encouraging. It was encouraging to see his development with a lot of our rookies. Timmy Horn is a guy that didn't get a lot of credit, and you want your draft class to be well, but you also do, if you got college free agent, that's a big part of it. And if they are better than your 5th rounder, we're going to play the better player. So Timmy Horn played well. D. Alford, guys that his first shot guy we got from the CFL, local guy. So you get excited about those guys, and they're playing their best football at the end of the year. And Drake, that's the stuff that really excites me.
Terry, you talk about culture and everything. Like, I'm curious as to how do you transfer it over to your scouting department? Is it a matter of you just saying they go out to gather the information and you bring it back, you make the final decision, or are you kind of giving them that leeway to say, hey, here's how I feel about a player, and we probably need to take a look at this guy?
Yeah, it's a really detailed process, and there's a lot of structure to it. So they're the first, they're boots on the ground, they're gathering the information first. And like I said, they're not just reporting what this coach said about the player. They're looking at the total picture and going through, and it goes all the way down into the hay's never all in the barn. We had the December meetings, we'll have February meetings, we keep gathering information, then we'll have the meetings in April, and all the way until we're making the pick, they're still gathering information. But then we get involved, and they basically, again, give us the information, but we're continuing to gather it. But it's a very detailed structure with specific questions on, hey, does this player fit our ethos? It's not a simple yes or no. Why does he fit the ethos? Why doesn't he fit the ethos? What's he missing? It's again, our scouting department does a really good job. Then the coaches get involved, and we continue to go through this process, and it goes right down to the wire. So it's a very detailed process. It's not just as simple as checking the box yes or no. There's a lot that is involved in it.
I'm not asking for specific names. Has there been a time where, in your 2 years as a general manager, that you drafted a player that might necessarily check all the boxes, so to speak?
Yep, absolutely. When you're drafting that many players, there's some times that you take a player and you say, okay, hey, this is an area that he needs to grow in, but we believe he will, and this is why. And so you take a shot on those players, and when the players get in the building, it's on them. And it's on them because you're not holding everybody's hand. So some players won't adapt and adjust the right ways, and then they'll and some players will. Some players that you might not have expected to do things, they'll grow up in a certain area. So you want every player to check every single box. Sometimes you'll take players that, hey, they need to improve in this area or that area, and whether it's a scout or a coach, or you believe, hey, we believe this player will take the next step. And so you can take swings at players in that way.
Anything else? You just mentioned earlier, just from a clerical perspective, do you anticipate?
Oh, God, I love that terminology. You had to get something in today. Okay.
You know, and Bravo TV and all.
Yep.
Do you anticipate that he could possibly be ready for the start of the season, or is that not realistic because of the Achilles?
You've seen a lot of different. You saw what Cam Akers did, and you've seen other guys, and who knows? You know, that's why it's hard to put a timetable. You know, everybody.
He played the next play after, so no telling. He might be ready for OTAs. That guy.
It's hard to put a timetable.
It's unbelievable.
Talk because everybody, when Adrian Peterson comes back quicker than everybody, it screwed a lot of guys. I mean, he's the ultimate outlier. It's just not fair. Everybody's body's different. You guys know that. So we'll see. There's nothing the Duke would do that would surprise me. Like to Terry's point on, I told you guys, it's one of the more incredible things I've seen, and his reason for not makes me appreciate the guy even more. And I don't know how he did that. I think I've seen two athletes go off on their own. It was him and Kobe Bryant. I'm sure there's others, and you guys can get lit up in whenever you guys talk about it. But it was impressive what the Duke did.
Duke.
All right. Anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you.